Honestly, the promise of taking the ethos of Ethereum and like improving upon the technology, right? And so some of the things that I was really excited about in that second come around were Ethereum killers, right? So like Cardano, IOTA were the ones that come to mind for me, which is funny because flash forward 5, 6 years later, they're not around anymore.
Hey there, good people in crypto land. Welcome back to my podcast, Decent People. I'm Matt Lysing, your host. Today on the show, I've got Jim Chang. He is a co-founder at Catalyst, but before that, he held roles with cool titles such as project manager for experiments at Aave, and he was also a product manager at Ripple. Before that, he spent some time at McKinsey. Looking at his LinkedIn, you can tell that he really just did not have a good time there because he talks about things like missing 20 or more birthdays of his friends and stuff while he was on travel working for that consultancy. So Catalyst is a bridge protocol that is trying to make it easier and safer for folks to move assets across different blockchains, like from Bitcoin to Ethereum or Ethereum to Cosmos or what have you. And so he is now founded Catalyst with some partners. They hope to go live later this year, but they're going to be doing a testnet probably over the summer. We talked about that and about some of the security issues and how the bridge technology is getting better and people are putting more thought into it after all of the enormous amount of money that was lost in bridge hacks in 2022. So Jim is totally on top of that. They're thinking about using native assets rather than wrapped assets, which if you know anything about this is probably a great idea. And they're talking about holding the collateral you need in several different contracts. So it's not just one big honeypot for hackers to come and attack. So with all that out of the way, let's get to the conversation and I hope you enjoy it. Thanks. Hey, Jim, welcome to Decent People. How you doing today?
Hey, I'm good. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm great. I'm trying to stay dry here in Los Angeles. It's raining yet again. It's
I
like
heard.
the 13th major storm we've had in 2 months or so.
It's like the wettest year in like a long time. I'm from San Diego. That's like what my parents have been telling me.
Yep. Yeah, I'm not complaining because we need the water, but and like the rain in LA, it's a different sort of vibe, but it is, yeah, it's pouring out there. I'm glad to be inside warm and talking to you.
Yeah, happy to be on.
So let's start from the beginning. You mentioned San Diego right then. Is that are you from San Diego?
So I was born in Chicago. So I spent some years as a kid in Chicago, and then I moved out to San Diego in my teenage years. So I went to high school there, and then I actually went back to Chicago for university. So I went to Northwestern. I studied math and economics there. But I feel, Californian. I spent
Yeah.
enough years there post college as well. I call it home.
That must have blown your mind going from Chicago with the seasons and the winter that's famous, and then you're in San Diego in January and you're probably going to the beach.
Yeah, yeah. I remember like my first year in San Diego, we went to the beach for Thanksgiving because it was like 90 something degrees.
Yep.
And that like completely blew my mind because I was super used to like being bundled up, being inside and eating with family inside. And now we had like, a picnic, which
Yeah.
was pretty surreal.
Yep. Yeah. One of my favorite things every year is in LA, there's the Rose Bowl parade, and it's always on January 1st. And 99 times out of 100, it's like a gorgeous day and it's blue skies and it's maybe 65 degrees, 70 degrees. And this is going out to all over the country. And I just love thinking about people in Minnesota or Maine tuning into this thing and seeing what a winter's like in Los Angeles.
Yeah, that's like during New Year's, right? Or New Year's Eve,
New Year's Day.
New Year's
Yeah.
Day.
Yeah. They have
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Rose Bowl parade and then they have the Rose Bowl game after that, the football game. Why did you guys move from Chicago to San Diego?
Just work. My dad got a new job. So he used to work at a bank in Chicago and then relocated to another bank
Okay.
in more like Orange County, LA area.
It
But
wasn't Silvergate, was it?
it's a bit of a more established one, Union Bank.
Okay. Cool. And what did he do for as a banker?
He was a risk management person. I
Nice.
don't know the exact term, but
He's the guy that
yeah.
everyone else in the bank hated. because
or
he would make them
thanked.
or thanked. Yeah, yeah, okay.
Yeah, but
In good times they hated him, in bad times they thanked him.
exactly. Yeah, but yeah, he's always loved data science and like assessing individual risk for credit applications and stuff like that. And he's actually the reason why, I know so much about any sort of financial concept as it pertains to
Well, yeah, I
personal
was going to ask
banking
you
and
if that
everything.
rubbed off on you.
Yeah, I would say so. Much I probably would like not to have been the case. I wanted to be like an independent person, but I would say my dad was definitely a really big influence on me in more ways than one, but definitely on the banking side and learning about the financial world and
Yeah.
getting into it.
Yeah, I hear you on that, but how can we get away from our parents and the influence they have on us, either good or bad? It's
Yeah,
pretty much impossible. I'm glad to hear that you have risk management like in your lineage because that's something we really need more in crypto right now, I feel. And we'll get into that, but so did you grow up, do you have brothers and sisters or what was the family life like?
no, I was an only child, so a lot of attention. My parents are Chinese immigrants, so they ran a tight ship, I would say, with me and education and extracurriculars and other sorts of things like optimize my chances at success in life. So, yeah, my mom, my dad, and I, we spent a lot of time together, I would say.
Yeah, that's nice. Were they first generation immigrants?
Yeah, yeah, first generation. They both came here for graduate school. So they met in undergrad,
All right.
came together in graduate school. And yeah, they were originally in Cincinnati. And then my mom got into an advanced degree program in University of Illinois, Chicago. So I was born there.
Okay, cool. And what did she end up doing?
She was a like statistician for a pharmaceutical company, Aave, if you know it,
Yeah, sure.
up in the suburbs of Chicago. Yeah, just both parents are just math people, numbers people
Hmm.
through and through.
Yeah. So it sounds like they ran a pretty tight ship. What were you like as a kid? Were you doing other stuff? Were you playing sports or in the symphony or anything like that?
Yeah, I did a lot of things. At least I thought it was a lot at the time, but I played three instruments.
Oh, wow. Which
So I
ones?
played piano, violin, and the clarinet.
All right.
So I was in band, orchestra at the same time, which was pretty intense.
You're like both of my sons combined. Like one son plays piano, the other plays violin, but we don't have anybody on clarinet. So we'll have to give you a call if we need that. If we need
Yeah,
some
like if you ever
lines.
need a tutor, let me know. You can
Yeah.
dust it off. But yeah, piano is beautiful. Piano and violin are both just very versatile instruments that just teach you general music theory. Yeah, highly recommend it. I hated it at the time, but now that I'm older, I can appreciate the skills that you develop from doing it.
Yeah, that's completely my strategy with my younger son. Is like he doesn't really love it, but I'm forcing him to do it because I know later in his life he'll thank me for it.
Yeah, definitely. But it's hard. It's hard to teach kids to do things that like don't seem very fun in the moment.
Yeah, but as having music in your life, and especially when you can play an instrument, for me it was guitar. I've played since I was 16, and like for so many times throughout the years, it just helped me either just have fun or process when I was feeling bad, or just it was a great outlet. So I really, yeah, I encourage kids to have that in their life as much as possible because I think it can really help, especially as you're going through your teenage years when things aren't really quite clear on what you're doing and where you're headed and how you might be feeling.
Definitely. Yeah. Speaking of personal outlet, I actually was part of not many people know this. I was a part of a heavy metal band in like middle school and high
You're on the
school.
clarinet.
I was actually a singer.
Nice.
Yeah, I grew up going to church and singing choir as well. Was a singer and also screamed for
Nice.
screamo music. Yeah.
All right. So what was the band called? What was the name?
Ephesus. It was like Christian metal, and
Okay.
Ephesus is like a town in like near Damascus that Jesus was passing through, and there was like a parable about it. Pretty small, but yeah, that was
Nice.
yeah, that was the impetus for it. So yeah, Christian heavy metal was
I
our
love
niche.
that. I love that. Have you heard of a band called King's X?
No, I have
What was
not.
that? Yeah, so I was into metal too, and they were not really overtly Christian. You could definitely tell from some of their lyrics, but they were more, yeah, on the Christian side rather than say Slayer. But
Yeah,
yeah, cool.
it's a balance the thread for sure. You want to have mainstream appeal with heavy metal fans who typically aren't very pious, I'd say.
No, no, I wouldn't say so. Um, so What were you thinking at that time? Did you have a plan for yourself, or what was your path looking like as you're in a heavy metal band and studying and doing all that stuff as a teenager?
I would say I didn't have too much of a plan. My plan was to execute on the tasks and the milestones that were set out in front of me, whether it be from my parents, like getting good grades and eventually taking AP classes or doing other kind of extracurriculars and becoming in leadership positions for those. Or I'd just say, like, from a societal perspective, right? It's like get good grades, be popular, stuff like that. I also played sports growing up. I swam and I played volleyball. So it was all about being good at those two sports and being a captain for the team or winning the games that
Yeah,
needed to be won, what have you. So I didn't think too hard as a
right.
kid too much.
And in San Diego, volleyballs, it's almost a must-have.
Yeah. Yeah. Then water polo. Water polo is really big as well.
Yeah,
But I never really got into water polo too much. It was the same season as volleyball, so I was a odd one to do swimming
yeah.
and then not do water polo with the rest of the team.
And then you mentioned you went back to Chicago to go to Northwestern. What did you study there?
I studied math, uh, and I did a dual degree in econ as well.
Okay,
So yeah, going back to Chicago was good to reconnect with old friends that I grew up with, and I also went to Northwestern and being in the cold and being isolated from parents was helpful.
sure. Yeah, that's an important part, I think, of college is just getting out on your own and trying to figure out how you can live by yourself. Yeah, Chicago's a great city too. I mean, it's definitely, I think, something we can appreciate more as a college student or a young adult. What was your path then? Where were you headed, like with math? What did you think you were gonna do when you graduated?
I think I had 2 ideas heading into university. One was that, I remember, maybe junior year of high school, my dad was really embedding into me that I should be like I don't even know the exact word he used for it, but basically like an investment banker. And that was ingrained to me to, okay, go get a prestigious job at a bulge bracket like Goldman or what have you,
Yeah,
and just go down that tried and true route. I had a kind of moment of deviation from that. I would say my sophomore year of college when I was reflecting on all the things that brought me joy in high school and in college, and that was actually tutoring people. And so I was a tutor throughout high school when I was good at tutoring, so maybe more like junior, senior year, like post SAT, ACT madness. And I carried that on into tutoring for my classes in freshman year of college. And I just loved it. I loved helping folks grasp concepts. And I really wanted to go into education, but not so much as a tutor slash teacher slash educator, but maybe more on kind of the builder perspective. So like doing like education tech. That was a pivot, right? I didn't want to do banking anymore. I wanted like a greater goal in mind in going to ed tech. And I think eventually did a little bit of that. I worked in an ed tech company or an intern ed tech company rather, and ultimately went into my first job out of college with the interest of doing education, but somehow fell down the finance slash crypto rabbit hole not shortly after that.
we need to go back, or maybe it's a little bit forward here. But one thing in my research on you that I found that was really interesting was that you co-founded Taproom, which was a beer delivery service. So that sounds like a bit
Yeah.
of a pivot too. How did that come about?
Yeah, I think when you're in your 20s, you want to just like experience what it's like to be a builder, right? And take things from 0 to 1. And so one of the things I loved doing in college was just drinking beer. So me and my friend, we had the idea that like there was a lack of really good like craft beers that were available to people on campus. And so we made like a craft beer delivery service. This is when things like delivery, everything as a delivery was getting really popular. So customized socks as delivery or personal hygiene. products as delivery. So we just rode that wave, and we got into a incubator program at Northwestern called the Garage. And so we spent a good chunk of junior year and senior year building that.
That's great. And I'm sure you had to test and taste all the beers that you wanted to send to people to make sure they were good.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely, there was a personal benefit to it as well.
Yeah. Yeah. No doubt. Um, and then another thing, so I guess then the pivot back to more out of ed tech into the financial world, I noticed that you spent some time at McKinsey. Was that sort of the first big job in that world, like the consulting world, the financial world?
Yeah. No, I had a few internships before that. So I interned at this company called Synchrony Financial. It was a spinoff of GE's financial arm. And so
Okay.
they did a lot of like retail finance, like analytics for like personal spend, and they did like personal loans and credit cards that were co-branded with stores like Sears and JC Penney. So that was like my first internship, just as someone that wanted to get some professional experience and wanted some money as well during the summer. And so that was my first internship. And then afterwards, I did my ed tech internship part time during the year. And then I interviewed at McKinsey because I had a realization after my ed tech internship where I wanted to basically tackle larger problems or problems that had larger scale to them. And so instead of helping out one school, and this is at the ed tech startup I worked at, helping one school augment their curriculum with MOOCs, essentially, like massive online open courses. I'm actually not sure if that's the exact acronym for it, but
That's close enough.
augmenting these
Yeah.
classes, yeah, and helping these students at a 25, 30 student per semester basis. I wanted to tackle like national scale problems. And I knew that a lot of consulting firms that have dedicated education practices were doing just that, right? They would do work in developing nations and work with the Department of Education in order to actually run these pilots using education or optimizing the operations of some sort of national education program. And so that's what got me really excited to kind of apply to consulting in the first place.
Forgive me if I'm wrong here, but I was reading how you described your time at McKinsey, and you noted that you got the United Airlines 1K status, that you missed 20 plus birthdays and friend obligations, and that you had amassed 5 pairs of the same blue gingham button down shirt. So I'm assuming I was dripping with sarcasm a little bit. So I'm assuming at the end there, it wasn't really for you.
Yeah, definitely not, for many reasons that I think may come across from my description of it, my time there. But I think to tie back to the through line that we've been pulling at, I joined McKinsey and got wound up into just the bureaucracy of it, where I wanted to do education work. But when I joined, they saw that I had finance experience working at Synchrony. And I just generally had a finance friendly background with math and economics and degree. And so they just staffed me on a lot of banking projects. And the kind of statement that I got from the staffing department was that you would do this for your first year. And then when you're a second year, when you have a bit more kind of agency over your staffing assignments, then you could get education related engagements. But then I realized that a lot of people want to be staffed on in the education kind of department, and there weren't exactly a lot of engagements. And so it became a politicking thing, right? You had to be very friendly with the partners and senior partners that were involved in those education deals. And you had to do a lot of extra work for them, right? You had to write these letter of proposals for them. And it all became very belabored, right? Taxing for me to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak, in that department. And I fell into my little finance lane and was enjoying working with the people that I found there.
Okay. Had you come across crypto at this point yet, or when did that hit your radar?
Yeah, so I would say I had come across crypto. I'd known about crypto for a few years up until that point. I found out about crypto in 2013, mainly as just dorm room conversation. my freshman year at Northwestern. So was keeping tabs of Bitcoin and eventually kept tabs of Ethereum as well when it came out and was excited about it, but lost kind of faith after the DAO hack and after the hard fork of the network and figured it wasn't prime time ready yet. So I was always tangentially related, financially invested into those assets, but never super involved, I would say. And I didn't get really involved until actually, I think it was my second or third, I think it was my second engagement at McKinsey, where I was working on a project for a bank and I was the youngest person in my team. And a client actually just came up to our team room and they asked, who knows about crypto?
Hmm.
And all of them looked towards me and said, I think Jim knows. And so I told them what I knew, not particularly much. They had follow up questions, and it was on me to give them a response. I think in consulting, you're in the mindset of helping out clients and doing something that we at McKinsey call client coaching, which is you find someone who wants to work with you more intimately and deeply, and irrespective of what the assignment is, you just do it because you want to kind of foster that relationship, right?
Sure.
And
Yeah.
so it was just going more into it with him, thinking about how this really large and established bank would actually think about embedding cryptocurrency into it, or how incumbents in the space leveraging crypto could usurp the market share of this incumbent. And
Yeah.
yeah, that was my deeper kind of delve into the subject matter, and I loved it.
I'm impressed that you were around for the DAO hack. There's not too many people that I meet that were experiencing that in real time. And then, so what about this deeper dive into crypto? What kind of, you said you had lost faith in it. Was there something that brought you back around?
That is a good question. I would say just like the honestly, the promise of taking the ethos of Ethereum and like improving upon the technology. And so some of the things that I was really excited about in that second come around were the Ethereum killers. So like Cardano, IOTA were the ones that come to mind for me, which is funny because flash forward 5, 6 years later, they're not
Yeah.
around
How
anymore.
are they doing?
Yeah, around, but
But they
you
don't
know,
really have much activity, do they?
yeah, and Ethereum is still going strong, even after the 2021 Alt L1 narrative and the next wave of ETH killers.
Yeah,
Ethereum still holds
I think we're
strong.
on our third wave of ETH killers. Yeah. So then that makes sense to me. Did you like then marry your financial background with your crypto interest? And is that how Ripple kind of came about? Was that a good fit for you at that point?
Yes, I think that was my thinking on why I wanted to go into Ripple.
Let's just, for people who might not know, just to set the stage, Ripple is a project that is trying to use cryptocurrency as an alternative way to have correspondent banking. So if firms need to send money from the US to Japan, for example, they could change, and they use their own cryptocurrency called XRP. And then you would change dollars into XRP. And then in Japan, they would change the XRP into yen, and you could make those payments. Don't think it's quite caught on the way that Brad Garlinghouse and some of the other folks at Ripple might have hoped, but that's the idea there, just to set the stage. And you are a product manager there. Is that right, Jim?
Yeah, exactly. I think the best way to talk about how I ended up at Ripple is going chronologically after that like initial moment in which the client asked me about crypto and I got deeper into it. Where essentially I was started researching in my free time, ended up speaking to other really crypto interested folks at McKinsey and participating in the research that we were writing there. Research in quotes because it was very light research, but I didn't realize it at the time. It was part of the initial formation of a dedicated crypto subgroup within the firm. And I think eventually after that, I realized that I was hitting the ceiling of what I could learn just purely from a research capacity. And I actually wanted to be an operator And so I want to work in crypto. At the time, I didn't know too much about it outside of what I read from articles and speaking about it with these kind of big financial institution clients that we had at the firm. So I only knew that I wanted to stay in San Francisco, and there was
Hmm.
only two big companies in San Francisco that seemed legitimate to me from in
Coinbase,
crypto.
Coinbase being the
Exactly.
other. Yeah.
Exactly. And I had a kind of fork in the road where I could have worked at Coinbase, but I ended up working at Ripple because I thought they were solving a real use case for sending money across borders, for remittances, and helping the layperson abstract away crypto and leverage it in the form of really quick and cost effective remittances. And I felt like that was a much better mission than building a trading venue for speculation with
Hmm.
Coinbase. And so that's why I decided to join Ripple and yeah, was there for a little bit less than 2 years.
So being on the inside there at Ripple, what did you come away with? Did you come away thinking they had a good product? Or I think the thing about Ripple that's a huge challenge, maybe the number one challenge, is just unseating the banks from the correspondent banking system because it's a huge moneymaker for them and they're very entrenched. And a lot of banks have invested a lot of money to have networks that in Southeast Asia or Africa or whatnot. I think last I had heard, if you want to move money into Africa, there's only like two or three banks that you can use. So they have a stranglehold on it. So I'm curious how you came away from inside Ripple with your thoughts on the problem that they're trying to solve.
Yeah, I think my biggest takeaway coming from Ripple was that payments is a very entrenched ecosystem of many players. And I knew this at McKinsey as well, but I didn't realize just how entrenched some of those relationships in those processes are. And even if you have a intuitive problem that you're trying to solve that you think crypto is good for, right? In this case, cross-border payments, right? Correspondent banks take anywhere from up to 3 to 5 business days. They are incredibly rent sinking, right? They take anywhere from 7 to 10%, if not more, depending on the pair on any given transaction. It's something that you think crypto is a no-brainer for, right? But I think what we realized and what I've come to take away from in my time at Ripple was that there's all sorts of ways to get around that through the traditional system, whether it be some form of IOU, right? Some form of like lease on capital for good rates, or whether the actual just technical integration is too complicated at this point to unwind and bring in a clean sheet solution. And so I think to this day, what is it, like 15 years since the creation of the Bitcoin white paper that was built for P2P payments, we still haven't seen crypto really take off for payments. And I think it's really because of that.
Yeah.
And that's a tough problem. And I still think that it's the right problem to go after in crypto, amongst others. But at the end of the day, people want fiat and they don't really care what's happening in between. If I want to send USD to Euro, they don't really care what's happening in between. And it's actually not as urgent or as dire of a user pain point than that I originally thought it was because of all those kind of entrenched relationships and systems.
Okay. So just one last thing here. Of course, the SEC is suing Ripple. It's a quite a high profile case. The SEC is alleging that XRP is a security and they didn't register it with the Securities and Exchange Commission. And so I think that lawsuit is coming towards an end, or the court case. Do you have any thoughts on that, or any opinion on who might come out on who might win that case?
Not any that I think I can share at the moment, but it has been as a outside party just viewing from the outside, a really monumental case to keep tabs on,
Yeah.
just as a interested party in the broader crypto community. And I think the one thing that I could say broadly is that as a company that is working in crypto and is very open about doing business in the United States. It's a tough kind of road to navigate down, I would say. But there's a lot of benefits to being unabashedly American based, and you got to go through the ambiguity of the regulatory space right now in order to reap those benefits.
Yeah, I guess I'm of two minds of this. And I think previously I thought this was a slam dunk because it just seemed like XRP was basically a security, just had all the hallmarks of a security. And we won't get into that. But then more recently, as I've watched the SEC go about enforcement actions and the way that they're approaching crypto under Chairman Gary Gensler, I'm not sure I want them to get a win under their belt because I don't think they're going about it in the right way. So I think it's a tricky one. And I do know that Ripple at least has more money than God almost. So that they've got a very well funded case against the government in this, but it will be very interesting to see how that eventually plays out. So, and then did you move from Ripple then to Aave?
No, I had another job in between that, and I left Ripple a little bit after DeFi summer and was like absolutely convinced that I wanted to build on Ethereum just after seeing just the magic happen with DeFi summer and the narratives that were taking hold with money Legos and composable finance and kind of the open nature of all these primitives that are being built. And I wanted to participate in that. Funny enough, I wanted to predict the next important technology that needed to be built. And so I ended up joining an NFT company called Unstoppable Domains as a product manager there as well. My bet was that NFTs were going to be super important, which played out, I would say. But I think Unstoppable Domains, which is similar to ENS, Ethereum Name Service, was that you would have NFTs as usernames, right?
Okay.
And so my thinking was NFTs will be important. What is the most important NFT? It's probably going to be names, right? If people are going to spend all this time in the metaverse, everyone needs a name.
Sure.
They don't necessarily need images or art to collect or what have you. That was becoming somewhat popular in late 2020 with Nifty Gateway and everything. But I would say I was somewhat right, but not completely right. But it was fun to build up into the craziness of JPEG Summer.
Yeah. I loved on your resume, the Aave, you were project manager for experiments. So there's something about that just made me laugh because it sounds like, hey, let's try an experiment this week. And then, oh, that didn't work. Let's try something else next week. It sounds like there's a bit of whimsy in it. But what were you doing for them in the experiments realm?
Yeah. So it was a really unique and rewarding role and super intellectually stimulating. Essentially, I got this role because I was having a conversation with Stani about what my dream role would be, and I was in a state in which so many things were happening in crypto that were so fascinating to me, whether it be DeFi or NFTs, social tokens, slash, the creator economy, slash passion economy. DAOs were becoming really big as well, decentralized science. And so I was spending a lot of my time in a lot of places, right? Researching a lot of things, talking about a lot of things. And I didn't really want to focus on one specific thing. And so I was articulating that to him. That was my dream role, was to have that kind of wide mandate and do a lot of, but still build, right? Do a lot of kind of 0 to 1s and still learn as a builder from that perspective. And so we co-created this role called head of experiments. I led an experiment lab at Aave called Newt. And it's basically a combination of like internal research as well as external proof of concepts. And so it's more of a funnel, right? Like we would research a lot of different topics that were really relevant to the broader Aave ecosystem. And then the things that were above the bar for us, we would dedicate our product development resources in order to bring them to life.
Okay.
And so definitely research a lot of really interesting things, which in, I would say, 2021 were still pretty nascent, but became really relevant over time. Things like ZK for privacy preserving deposits, MEV recapture within the protocol, things around on-chain IP for NFTs, and a few other things like identity primitives for under collateralized lending. So definitely a lot of thinking that I had in
Yeah.
my year and a half there.
And did you eventually get around to cross-chain bridges at this point?
Yes, definitely spent time thinking about cross-chain bridges while I was at Aave. It came mainly from the relaunch or the design and then eventual launch of Aave v3, which I'm not sure if you're familiar, but Aave v3 has a feature called portals, which essentially allows for cross-chain lending.
Uh,
So you have
Let's first of all, let's just like break it down and tell people what a cross-chain bridge is and why it's important.
yeah, definitely. I think the high level need for a bridge is essentially thinking about two different environments that need some sort of connector. And so, not too dissimilar to how a bridge might connect two different land masses in the real world. That's how a bridge functions within crypto as well. And so, why are there different land masses is probably a good question. But the reality is that, and I think we've seen this play out in the past few years, is that there really isn't going to be one home for all the different applications that people are building and using. There's
Mhm.
going to be multiple homes that have multiple uses. And so Alt L1s were a good example of that, right? You had Solana and Polygon and Avalanche come out in 2021, or become popular rather. And then people need kind of ways in which they can actually move assets or move their accounts and just generally communicate between those two different things. But the issue is that when these environments and these blockchains were created, they weren't actually thinking about what communication between them would look like. And so bridges became that technology that allowed for the connection between these kind of two blockchains so that value and information and general messages can be moved between one another. And so the why is basically because the world will be multi-chain. There will be many different blockchains that people are interacting with. That's just a foregone conclusion, right? We can't really unwind that fact that's been playing out over the past few years. And so what we can do is actually build very scalable and safe technologies in order to actually connect those pieces together and allow users to really easily interact between all of them.
And again, at a high level, what typically, or a simplified version of what happens is because you can't move Ethereum to like another blockchain, but you can deposit your Ethereum into a bridge contract, and then you'll get a wrapped token, right? That represents that same amount
Mhm.
of the crypto that is on the second bridge or on the second blockchain that you want to access. It's not like you're moving your assets directly. It's here. I'm going to put my ETH in an account, and that's my collateral, and then I'm going to get that same amount of money to use on the second blockchain, whatever it might be. But that, I think, has led to some issues where there have been hacks and software bugs that have led to quite a lot of money getting lost in these bridges. Going back to the risk management stuff that we were talking about earlier, how are you thinking about that with Catalyst? And is that the paper you wrote on Mirror? And you had a great graphic in there that $2.5 billion was lost in bridge hacks last year alone. So it seems like that's a significant hurdle for the industry. So how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, definitely. I would say though the mechanism that you outlined, this like wrapping of assets and then minting of a synthetic asset is was like a V1 implementation of actually connecting the value of these disparate blockchains together. And as we saw this play out, if you have one area in which you're basically holding all of this money and then you have another contract that is minting not real money, but you hope it's backed one to one. That is definitely opening up. It's a mechanism that opens itself up to attacks, right?
Yeah,
Because you have, as we've seen, hundreds of millions of dollars, sometimes upwards to 700, $800 million locked into one single contract. And so that's the biggest bug bounty and
for
really
sure.
big kind of attack vector for any sort of hacker or exploiter, right? And so we've seen a myriad of ways in which this has been attacked. And I definitely don't think that this is a sustainable solution for this space because we do need safe and sustainable kind of technological primitives in order to connect these pieces together, or else we're essentially risking just terrible user experience, which will not lead to mass adoption and will not lead to healthy trade between these blockchains, similar to that
Yeah.
more IRL analogy I was making earlier.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think the future is definitely multi-chain. I don't think there's going to be just one. So this is a very important topic. But what is the thinking more recently about bridging, and rather than, you know, putting $700 million in a smart contract? Where are we now on the thinking of how to do this more safely that doesn't create this huge flashing sign for hackers?
Yeah, so I'd say there's probably three different approaches to isolate and mitigate the risk of actually moving cross chain. All three of these, by the way, are things that I'm personally implementing into Catalyst, which is my new project. I know you asked that earlier, so just wanted to revisit that question.
Yeah.
But the first piece is essentially providing more secure verification mechanisms for actually moving value cross chain. And so not every single, but the vast majority of exploits that we've seen the past year and a half as it pertains to bridges basically came from mechanisms that rely on certain off-chain parties or just certain institutions in order to verify a transaction. And so, all that to be said, we're essentially not inheriting the security of blockchains when you're actually moving money from one chain to another, but you're essentially relying on this trusted committee of anywhere from, it used to be as low as five, but now it's more like 9 to 15 companies that are essentially running their own like nodes of these blockchains and verifying these messages, right? And
So you're getting into the central point of failure problem that blockchain is supposed to alleviate.
yeah, absolutely. And you can also think of it as a lot of these blockchains have built up over the years these large treasuries of sorts, like large stake pools that basically guarantee the safety of transactions happening on these blockchains through atomic security. Ethereum has, I don't know the number top of my head, but I think it's like 50, maybe $100 billion a stake in its protocol. And so it's pretty secure in that regard. But when you're relying on a committee of 10 institutions, how do these institutions guarantee that they're not going to actually lie about the transactions? It's because they also have to put up money, right? But they're not going to put up $100 billion of money, right? They likely don't have that much money. They can probably put up a couple $1 million of money. But then you realize that if there's more than a couple $1 million that are being transferred, it becomes an economic incentive for these committee members to actually just take that money and give up the stake that they've put into the system. And
Yeah.
so it's not very scalable.
Yeah. Again, in crypto, you shouldn't be trusting anyone. You don't need to be trusting if you have a blockchain that is
Yeah.
there. So
Yeah.
it sounds like Catalyst is working on chain. So
Yes, absolutely. We're doing something called native verification, which essentially means there's two blockchains that are validating the transactions of one another. And so we're not trusting an intermediary party in order to validate transactions. And so that's something that the space calls trust minimization, because you're inheriting the trust properties of just the two chains that you're interacting with, and not a kind of like an additional third chain or an additional trusted committee.
yeah, that's great. So tell us more about Catalyst. What are you hoping to achieve, and we've been outlining some of the problems here, but what was the kind of the impetus for you to jump into this?
Yeah, definitely. We kind of been laying the stage of all the different problems that I've seen from the V1 solutions of the cross chain space. I think quickly, just talking about the last two pieces that I was saying that kind of allow for different approaches to alleviate the exploit risk. Another one is the isolation of capital. So you don't have all the capital that lives on one contract. It's actually spread out between hundreds of contracts. So it isolates the exploit risk if something does get compromised. And then the last piece is actually just using native assets. And so no sense of wrapping an asset and then minting another asset in which you have to trust this kind of mechanism in order to make sure that all these synthetic assets are backed one to one with real assets. You can just move real assets, right? And so real ETH is actually swapped for real Matic on Polygon, for example. And that kind of sets the stage, I think, for all the things that I want to accomplish with Catalyst. I've been in the space for quite some time now. I've seen all the different approaches that have been taken from a DeFi and from a cross-chain perspective and applied it to Catalyst. And so it's essentially a cross-chain value transfer mechanism that does exactly that, right? It's like we're doing native verification. We have isolated risk into hundreds of different pools, and all these different pools have native assets, no synthetic or wrapped asset, and in order to facilitate cross-chain swaps. And so again, trying to mitigate all that risk that we've seen from a first principles perspective. And I do think this is going to be a safer primitive that people can rely on and unlock more of that global trade that I want to see between these multi-chain environments.
Yeah, that's great. And where are you guys in the terms of the startup and Catalyst? Like, are you live, or where are you in the whole development process?
We're not live yet, but more details will definitely come out on the timing of that. As of right now, we're aiming for a testnet launch this summer and then a mainnet launch sometime after that, maybe in the fall or winter of this year.
Okay, great. And then I just wondered, forgive me for saying, but sometimes I feel like bridges feel like in the larger crypto world, like a step 10. And we're still, I think, struggling sometimes with step 2 and 3 to get things right and have the right security to get people onboarded and to make crypto more user friendly. I think those are challenges that need to be figured out. And then bridging is a little bit down the road. Or how do you feel about that?
I definitely can see where you have that sentiment, right? There's a lot of foundational things that still need to be sorted out in crypto broadly, and bridges add a lot of complexity to that. I'm actually of a different camp where I think that bridges are actually kind of the solution to some of those problems that we're seeing. And to go to your analogy, bridging may seem like step 10, but once you peer underneath the hood, you do realize it's like a step 1.5 because it really unlocks a lot of the problems that or solutions that we're trying to achieve. And so I know you mentioned like UX, for example, or just like general accessibility to mainstream audiences. I do think bridges are super important for that because right now, I think there are a lot of inherent things that are hard about crypto that you can't really abstract away from a user experience perspective. Things like paying with gas and signing transactions. But with the creation of kind of a new blockchain that kind of natively solves for all those different things, you can have an instance in which all the users are actually interacting with this brand new blockchain, but all the kind of underlying security and all the assets and things that people really care about still live on Ethereum. So you're like remote controlling it, right? So how does that remote controlling work? It's through bridges. And so I definitely think that bridges are a underlying infrastructure that allows for the enablement of all the things that we want to achieve in crypto from a UX and beyond.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. So Jim, thank you so much for all your time and for sharing your story with us and educating us on bridges. And I know you said that Catalyst is hoping for testnet in the summer, but if folks want to get involved or check you out, let them know where they can find you.
Yeah, of course, anyone could ping me on Twitter. I love to have conversations there. My handle is at Jim, so it's Jim. And if you want to follow Catalyst as well, we'll have some announcements even before testnet. And then that is Catalyst AM on Twitter.
Yeah, Jim, thanks again. I really appreciate your time and good luck with Catalyst and everything going forward.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thanks for the convos on my childhood. It's cool to unpack all the through lines that I haven't thought about for quite some time.
Yeah, I love doing that. It usually leads to interesting conversations. So thanks for being willing to dive back in.
Yeah, of course. Thank you again.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for joining us. And don't forget to rate and follow this show on Apple, Spotify, and Amazon Music. DeCent People is a production of Decentral Media. It is produced by Matt Bogart with music by Brian Duncan and Kareem Imes.